For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Advertising legend Reg Lascaris joins me to discuss his book, Lessons from the Boot of a Car. In the introduction to your book, Lessons from the Boot of a Car, you state that it's not a how-to book or a how-I-did-it book. What is the book about and why did you decide to write it?
Well, it's been 30 years since we started this company, and I thought, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here. So I thought, let me write a book that's history of this company and a bit of my memoirs as well. But along the way, having written the book and told the funny stories, there's a lot of funny stories in the book, I've tried to be very, very honest and tell my real story. But at the end of every chapter, whether it's a fun chapter or a serious chapter or an oops chapter, I wrote down the lessons I learned from each experience. So that's really why I wrote it, because in fact my daughter said to me one day, "Dad, why don't you tell me what you've learned in business?" So I said, okay, I might do that. And then that inspired me to write the book.
What drew you to the advertising industry and what were the major challenges you faced when you started your agency?
The biggest challenge we faced was trying to get some money to start the business. We had nothing. John and I had no money at all. We were very naive, and naivety is actually a strength, not a weakness, because you'll go and ask questions and do things you wouldn't normally do. So we sat down together, had a few beers, and decided we're going to start this business. John then told me he was going overseas for a year to write a book. So I said, well, make me a promise. If you come back by the end of the year, then I'll plan everything up to that time, which I did. So then I went to look for money, and that was another story, because obviously the banks wouldn't give me money. I had no security at all. But eventually I borrowed, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? I borrowed money from a friend, and who became a partner in the business, and that's how we started the business. But I've always loved advertising, always been fascinated by it. And if you read the beginning of the book, you'll see that I had a lot of other experiences that just didn't suit me.
If you could pinpoint some of the most valuable lessons you've learnt over the years, what would they be and why?
There's been quite a few lessons, and I kind of list my favorites at the back of the book. One is you've got to be passionate about what you do, and I think some of them are pretty obvious. The second one is, and I think it's a very important one, you've got to be a tough-minded optimist, because you're going to bump your head so many times, but you just got to see your way through it. You've got to be optimistic, and you've got to say, I'm going to win this game. Thirdly, you've got to set down huge, audacious, big goals, but huge goals that you know you'll never reach, because the thing is, if you write down goals or a vision that you reach, then you say, well, what's next? So our vision was to be the first world-class agency out of Africa. And a lot of people say, well, you've reached that. Well, we haven't really. It's still got a long way to go. So, and then things like, on the personal side I learned is, if you have a partner or partners in a business, never attack the person, attack the issues, because you're always going to have arguments. So if you put down the issues, say this is the issue, and you talk about the issue, but as soon as you get personal, that's the end of the relationship. And I guess it's like a marriage as well. If you get too personal, you get nasty. That's the end of it. Other things I've learned that, if you have a fixed strategy, forget about it, because your strategy is going to change. So what I say to people is, it's not a map, it's a compass. So you've got to find your way through things. And the most important thing is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, because you've got to develop a culture and nurture that culture. And I think we have a pretty unique culture in this business.
What is your view on creativity in South Africa and the country's emergence as a credible producer of world-class advertising work?
South Africa has always kind of been better than its size. If you go to the Cannes Advertising Awards, which are like the Oscars of advertising, you'll see that we're always in the top 10. But as a country, we're probably number 12 or 14 in terms of market size. So we always shoot above our weight. And I often ask myself why, and I think I know the answer. We're such a diverse nation, different cultures, different people, that I think if you bring people of different cultures together, you create a very creative culture. And I think there are lots of very good creative people in South Africa.
How important is an entrepreneurial spirit and a new wave of energetic entrepreneurs to create jobs and increase GDP growth?
Well, I think that's the single most important thing for South Africa, because you've got to create a lot of small businesses. And if we don't do that, we're going to have a problem. So I just wish there was this kind of a school of entrepreneurship, or there was some big institution created that was there just to train youngsters who want to go into business and help them. Because I think we have the spirit. And if young people don't do it and they land up on our version of the dole, they'll never do anything. So I think we have to encourage small business. Take a country like Italy. Italy has a huge middle class. Why? Because it has lots and lots of people who make shoes, and lots of people who do fashion and art and whatever. So we have to create a culture of entrepreneurship, and we have to help people do it.
The ruling African National Congress turned to your advertising agency for their first election campaign. What role does advertising play in creating political awareness and education?
You know, a political party is like a brand. You've got to build a brand, you've got to develop the brand, you've got to communicate the key points. You know, the thing about advertising, it's controlled communication, so you can repeat the message time and time again. So when the ANC approached us, and it was quite a shock actually, because they just knocked on our door, came in and they say they'd like to meet John and I, and they'd like us to handle the first election. We had been working on the peace campaign, which was prior to that, so I think they obviously heard about us. And it was very different to selling baked beans, so we really enjoyed the experience.
What lessons did you learn from that?
Well, I learned the lesson that we first of all we had to set up a 24-hour structure to handle it, because we were asking people in the street questions and then replying to them. So it was a very fast and quick experience. And one of the lessons I learned is it's not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow.
That was advertising icon Reg Lascaris speaking about his book, Lessons from the Boot of a Car.